Meanwhile, Democrats are piling on this whole Jeff Sessions situation over Russia and what he knew and when he knew it, and whether there were other administration officials who knew it, all the way up to President Trump, to General Keane now on how bad this fallout gets. It's always good to see you, General. We were talking to some market wonks who were saying their selfish fear was that it gets away from an agenda that they like, tax cuts, lower regulations. And that is their big concern, and one of the reasons why the markets have been hiccuping in the last couple of days. What do you think?
Well, first of all, it's a huge win for Russia. Just think about it. I mean, they were able to penetrate the defenses of the Democratic National Committee quite successfully. Could not do it with the Republicans.
That's a good point, and they did try.
And ever since that time, their objective clearly was to undermine the democratic process. And ever since that time, there's one story after another, at least alleging that the Russians have had contact with people in the Trump administration. There is absolutely no evidence to suggest there's such a thing, but it's a huge psychological win for Russia.
And a huge psychological win for the Democrats, who had a chance to change the narrative right after the president's widely acclaimed speech before Congress, and reclaim the offensive. But for how long?
Yeah, clearly that unfortunately has happened, and terrible in terms of Attorney General Sessions. I've known him for years, and everybody who knows Jeff Sessions knows that he's an honorable man.
So we played the full long question that he got, which puts it into better perspective here, that he thought he was answering a question about operatives and surrogates and all when he left out the fact that he had met with the Russian ambassador. But do you think he hurt himself by not following up after that session, or even if his staff reminded him, boss, maybe you should clarify, you did meet with the Russian ambassador in your Senate office, but just get it out there. The fact that he didn't is fueling this argument he was hiding something. What do you mean?
Well, I think that's the mistake that he made. I don't think he really made any mistake in the testimony itself, because there was another question being asked, as you suggest. But particularly given the spotlight that General Flynn had, and that the spotlight on him was as a result of a meeting with that same Russian ambassador, and all that took place just a couple of weeks ago. At that time, certainly he should have come forward and said, well, listen, I had a meeting with the Russian ambassador as well. It was an innocuous, harmless meeting that we had, kind of routine. Yeah, that should have been done.
When you look back at this, and it's funny, this all got going when remember, President Obama in his waning weeks in office threw out 35 Russian diplomats. Everyone was surprised that Vladimir Putin didn't follow in kind and do the same thing, which is typically, I guess, what happens. So people even then start saying, well, wait a minute. Now, I could understand that Vladimir Putin is saying, well, why should I go tit for tat with this guy, because he's going to be gone soon, so I'll hold off on doing anything drastic. But people are reading into that non-action on his part that there was a deal, that there was an understanding, and the fact that President-elect Trump wasn't saying anything critical of him fueled that argument.
Yeah, I think he did. And all the national security team around President Trump has spoken very clear-eyed about Russian intent and how they're trampling on U.S. interests and those of our allies, and we have to be willing to confront them and change their behavior. But I do think the president has always believed that he wants to negotiate with Putin, and as a result of that, he's restrained himself from ever saying anything negative about him, because he doesn't want to harm that negotiating deal before it takes place.
But he hasn't told his men and women in his cabinet and sub-cabinet levels to do the same. So Mattis has been quite critical, the defense secretary, on a number of questions that have popped up on Russia, as well as the CIA director. So if you had an administration-wide edict to go soft on the Russians, it hasn't been that way.
Oh, it hasn't happened at all. Quite the opposite. They're all very clear-eyed. They're all strongly opposed to Russians.
Do you think the president is?
I think he is, too. But I do think that it was unnecessary on his part never to say anything negative about the #1 thug in the world and how he's been imposing his will on people. And what he's done in Syria is absolutely horrific. It could be described accurately as a war crime in terms of targeting civilians.
That's what John McCain has said. He's worried that this president is setting a dangerous precedent, trying to negotiate with a guy who's not a nice guy.
Yeah. But I think the policy, when it goes forward, will have two major thrusts to it. One is to engage Putin and the other one is a willingness to confront Putin as well and have a credible deterrence against him. I think both of those will go on at the same time, and we'll see if he has any success in the negotiations. I suspect not.
Well, ironically, it was Ronald Reagan who got détente really going with the Russians and Mikhail Gorbachev. So there's precedent for the tough guy, doing the negotiating thing.
And they both did the same thing, Neil, and that is they're rebuilding the military, something the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians pay a lot of attention to. Those are real capabilities, and when you back that up with intent, then you have a credible deterrence, and that's the direction we're heading.
Yeah. Mean what you say what you mean. General, good seeing you. Have a
good talking to you,
safe weekend, and for your wonderful service to this country. You do not mess with the general. I usually hold back on the tough questions when he's physically here. I can't wait till he's on remote, then I'll just blast him.